Welcome to the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families podcast, where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Hi, thanks for joining the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your host. I have with me today Kathryn, a mom who's been alienated, who was alienated, and has managed to work through that. So Kathryn is going to share her story and how her relationship with her son was compromised. Kathryn, thank you for being a guest. Why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, so my story, it's a very complicated web, which is why I ended up writing a book about it, because there's so much to it. But I met my ex-husband when I was very young. I was 20. I was newly sober. So I mean, I don't come from a perfect background. Like, everybody has their stuff. But I got sober really young, started working in treatment. I actually used to work with his mom, who, definitely broke a boundary there because she was a clinician of mine, who, was like, I'll go ahead and introduce you to my son. So there was already an imbalance there. And I didn't really know much about boundaries back then, until I started working in the mental health field and started, learning more about that. But yeah, it really kind of felt like I was groomed to an extent. And, he ended up, there were a lot of red flags with him. I mean, he was very controlling from the get-go. There were, love bombs, classic narcissistic trauma bonding. And I didn't recognize those patterns early on. I didn't really know what healthy consisted of. And so we went down this road where we got married, had a child together. And as it progressed, it just got worse and worse. And, there was infidelity, to the point where it was like, I mean, he was basically living a double life. I mean, he was going out of town and like meeting men, women, couples. Like, it was really bad. It was really, really bad. And then from there, finally got the courage to leave when my son was a baby still. I mean, he was like not even 2 years old. He was like 18 months when I finally decided to leave. And then he punished me for it. He never had any of the parenting duties, never changed a diaper, never helped out with a baby. But as soon as I, said enough was enough, he, made an intention to make our lives miserable. And right off the bat, there was coercive control. And, he made it very clear he didn't want to pay child support and he was going to punish me. So fast forward, very early on, he started dating someone who was a district attorney in the same courthouse where we were going for family court, which I thought was, pretty strange. I don't know how they kind of started their relationship, but it happened. And also very early on, my son started saying that his father was hurting him, and he was coming back with, physical marks. And I was walking this fine line of, I didn't really know how to handle it. I'm like, is this really going on, or is my son just saying things? And very early on, I made sure that he was in therapy and had that therapeutic support, because I didn't really know what was going on. But they definitely painted me as a scorned ex-wife who was out for revenge or something. And I was just trying to protect my son. And because his soon-to-be wife was a district attorney in the same county, when something was reported to the police, when there were very, very obvious signs of abuse that were reported to police, what ended up happening is, it crossed her desk. It's not up to the police for charges to be filed. It's up to the prosecutor. And he was living in the same house with the prosecutor. So even when things were reported to CPS, there were no charges, which there never would be because his wife was the DA. we just looked like we were making a bunch of false allegations, and there were just inconclusive reports over and over. And so we just really learned to keep our mouth shut and keep our heads down. And I, did my best to try to walk this tightrope of, trying to not alienate my son from his father, and be like as, even keeled as possible, but also not ignoring behaviors that put my son at risk and, put my son's safety at risk. So I had to learn to like validate my son, but not demonize his father, and that's a really hard place to be. And his father consistently tried to alienate my son from me by telling my son all these lies, telling my son I'm a terrible person, that I'm a drug addict, that I was the cheater, when these are all things that he was doing to me. And yeah, I do have a recovery history, and but I was always open with my son about what I did for work, that I do help people get sober, and that I am a clinician, and that I did have a history, but I did it in a way that was like child appropriate, and like, you know, it was a healthy thing that was supported. It wasn't like, yeah, I was a drug addict. It was, I help people now. So, but he used any little bit of anything he could use against me, he did. And yeah, it was just a really hard road for a long time. And then at a certain point, his DA wife became a judge in the same courthouse as well, and she was friends with our family law judge. And my son would say, "Hey, I went over to the other judge's house and described her." And I'm like, "That's our family law judge." And so for years, there were unfair judgments. And I kept saying, "We need a change of venue. This isn't right. This isn't fair." And even my own attorney was just like, "You're giving her too much power. They're not going to see this as a conflict of interest." And it got to the point where things were so contentious and my son was so unhappy. And he had a therapist at the time who recommended minors counsel. And his wife and him found out about the recommendation. So they actually went to the therapist's office without my son. And they had never taken him to an appointment either, never taken him to therapy. But they showed up to her office and threatened her and said, "You need to undo your recommendation for minors counsel and absolve his dad of taking him to any sort of therapy appointment," because it was court ordered that he had to start taking him. And yeah, and the therapist was like, "I'm not doing that." And she actually reported his wife to the judicial board, and the judicial board said they were investigating her, and then nothing ever happened. And she's still a judge to this day. So, I mean, thankfully, because of all this, and because my son just continuously started standing up for himself, um, they finally just let him stay here. I mean, he was just like, he kept refusing to go over there over and over and over. And they were finally like, "We don't want to deal with having to go to court anymore. So just take him." And yeah, I mean, we got lucky, but I mean, it could have gotten to the point where, things could have gotten way worse. I mean, they could have gone way worse. We're really lucky that he got out of it. Um, but yeah, that's kind of our story in a nutshell.
So, did they ever have a family together? Your ex and his judge wife?
No, so her daughter is actually a little younger than me. So she's a lot older than him, and he was 9 years older than me. So there's a big age gap there, so they never had children.
And when how old is your son now?
He's 11.
11. So it went on for about 8 years or so?
It went on for, yeah, almost a decade. Yeah.
And does he still have a relationship with his father now?
He refuses to talk to his father. It got to the point because he just kept catching his father in lies, and his dad was like smoking pot around him, and like he never showed up to anything. There was a lot of neglect going on. And my son was like, he could see my healthy household, and then he was comparing it to his dad's household, and he's like, this isn't right. And he just got to the point where he had had enough.
So when he was in having parenting time with his dad and then he would come back to you. What was that behavior like? How did you start to recognize
Oh,
that it was intentional?
I mean, it was like an exorcism sometimes, I'll be honest. I mean, my son would come back so dysregulated. I mean, he was diagnosed with like ADHD and anxiety and trauma, and I mean, he would like blow up on me because he was in a reactive home and I was the healthy parent. And so I got the brunt of it. And there was a lot of times where I thought, God, am I doing something wrong? Is it me? Like I thankfully had myself in therapy this whole time too, but yeah, it was rough. It was really rough.
So, some of the behaviors that he exhibited, at what point did you start to realize it was more than just a typical high conflict separation? What clued you in? It sounds like you have a mental health background, but when did you start to recognize that?
So I really started to recognize that it was something else when my son started saying that his dad was hurting him, when he was saying, daddy hit me, or like the worst time was when he was 3 years old and he had a belt buckle mark on his back and like welts on his back, and he said, daddy hit me with a belt. And I was like, he hurt him. Like there's no way, there's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. He hurt him. And with narcissists, they do pinpoint times of celebration and rejoice. So, like, it would be around like birthdays, Christmas. Like, he would have these intentional marks on him. And I'm like, what is going on? But it was the same in our marriage. I mean, he ruined holidays, he ruined birthdays. He would find a way to like mark him almost. Like, it was really, really insidious. It was evil.
And then what did like the court experience prior to him having a relationship with the district attorney and now judge?
Mhm.
Was that something he initiated? Or like how did that transition from the separation to the conflict there?
So, very early on, when we first separated, I didn't think that he was actually going to want his son because he had never been involved. And then all of a sudden, he's like, I want my 50-50. I'm not paying you. And I'm like, I don't want your money. That's not what this is about. I'm like, you could just go. Um, but he really, it was like a punishment. He very early on filed paperwork. He was the one to file first. He was the one to, try to take custody of my son.
Did he ever counterclaim that there was abuse in your household?
He didn't say there was abuse, but he painted me as unstable. He painted me as a drug addict. He painted me as someone who had anger issues. He tried to say that I was abusive to him in our marriage, which is absolutely not true. Um, so yeah, I mean, he tried to make it seem like I was unhinged, and then because his mom used to work with me and was my clinician at a certain point, she actually wrote a letter for him for court saying that, talking about my past and how I was a drug addict and, how I was this unstable person, even though when I actually had my son, I was 6 years sober and I had been working in the mental health field for 5 years. So I was like, they were really trying to use my past against me, and which made it really hard because I didn't deny it. I said, yeah, I do have that past, but this is what I'm doing now. And it just made it look like it was, quote unquote high conflict, which has become like a catch-all phrase that traps the abuser beside the abuse, or so it was just like it didn't matter.
In the court hearings, I'm just curious, how many judges? I mean, is your county quite large or was there a multitude of different judges? How did that play out?
So it's a smaller courthouse.
Okay.
It's kind of like everybody knew everybody, which, made it more difficult. And, even though I had raised concerns from the very beginning, it just kind of fell on deaf ears. And yeah, like even my attorney was just like, she doesn't have the kind of power you think she does. She's not that tied in with the courts. And I'm like, but she is. And I felt like no matter what I said, it didn't matter. And it wasn't until, his therapist reported her to the judicial board that somebody finally started looking into it.
So were they basically in a relationship throughout that whole process?
They were, yeah.
And what did the parenting time end up being between you and him? How was that split?
It was very early on split to 50-50, and my son had a ton of problems, a ton of behavioral issues. He was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and attachment disorder, by his pediatrician, and yeah, I mean, it was just he went from having me all the time to just having to be with his dad half the time, who was reactive and angry and, and abusive.
So you wrote a book. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did. I wrote a book. It's called Your Honor, Not My Son's Keeper. And it talks about just the whole process from start to finish of, how I was predisposed to being with a narcissist to begin with and how I dealt with it during and after. And just from a psychological standpoint, from a mother and also someone who is deeply spiritual. And I mean, there were times where, it felt so impossible and I didn't have anyone to lean on. I ended up just having to, lean on my spirituality and my trust in God. And that is really what got me through at the end of the day. And I think because I have that strong spiritual connection, my son had that too. And it really helped him get out of it. And it really helped him have faith when things felt just impossible, where he felt like a prisoner. He felt stuck for a really long time.
Help our listeners understand when you get separated from your child at such a young age until you were able to have him back in your life as a primary parent, how do you help him? I mean, it sounds like you put him in therapy, but what are some other strategies you found helpful during that time?
So, one thing I learned, and I mean, this is awful because, there was abuse that happened. But one thing I learned when we were in therapy is that you can't overreact when your child is telling you these things because it can elicit more of the same reaction. That is hard. So I couldn't run to him and be like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" I had to really stay calm and just, show him love and support and validation without being like over the top about it. So just really learning to be like an unbiased ear and not ever say anything disparaging about the other parent, which is really hard when you know things are wrong and you want to validate your child, but you also are walking that fine line again. And you don't want your child to feel like there's anything bad about them by saying something bad about the other parent. So I was always just an unbiased ear and I was just supportive and I would say like how are you feeling? Like how does this make you feel? What can I do to support you? So that was a big thing, and then also too just always reassuring him that that he is loved and that no matter what I was going to be there, and I really had to be that rock for him, even when it felt like I was going to crumble because things were so difficult. I really had to be that strong rock for my son.
So, how do you think recognizing that there was a level of abuse from the other parent and understanding it sounded like you were trying to be fair and having his father play a role in his life as well, but it's a
Mhm.
balance, right? It's a balance of protecting
Yeah.
the child and that shared parenting that all kids need. How do you manage that with him when he needs that role model?
Just like learning to stay calm and control my emotional state. And again, easier said than done. And I didn't want to seem like I was like emotionally shut down, like I still was supportive and loving and kind. But like I would say things, for instance, like when he would come back and say, dad said you're this or dad said you're that. And like really adult things that dad was saying. And I would just have to say, I'm sorry that your dad is trying to have a really adult conversation with you. How does that make you feel? And he would say, really uncomfortable. And my son really learned to have that openness with me where even to this day, I mean, he feels like he can tell me anything because I don't overreact. I just am kind of that, unbiased ear for him.
So many parents that are going through this. You commented earlier about not so much you didn't mention the word isolation, but you didn't feel like you had a support system and your faith
Yeah,
guided you through that. It's such a common concern for parents who are in high conflict, whether it's alienation, whether it's coercion, manipulation, intentional sabotage, that they don't have a support system. I think a lot of parents feel like if they voice that, they might be judged. And especially with what they were using against you and the things they were saying about past drug abuse. And you almost feel like you might potentially be judged or
right.
doubted. Can you share a little bit about that if you shared or if you had those emotions
Like the emotions of being doubted.
of just isolation and doubt and
Yeah.
lack of support?
I mean, yeah, well, for starters, I didn't really have any family here. All my family is out of state. Like, I came out here to California to get sober and to work in treatment. And so when we went through this, I literally didn't have anyone. And part of it, was we shared, we shared all of the bills and everything together. So when we split up, I had to like rent rooms. It was making like $12 an hour. And I had to choose sometimes between, paying for my family law attorney and feeding myself. Like it got to that point. I don't know how some parents do it. I mean, I really don't know how I did it. It was like really like by the skin of my teeth. I mean, it's cost so much money to fight someone in court, and I think a lot of times it's like whoever has the most money wins, and his family had money. I mean, he came from money and I come from, not money. I had to I was self-made at the end of the day, and um yeah, I feel bad for people that have to go through that.
Do you feel like the court at any point were biased toward you because of the allegations he made about you in your past, drug challenges?
I really feel like the court, like, didn't hear me out because of that, yeah, because, I mean, his mom had something to say about it too, and that really hurt on so many levels because me and his mom were actually friends for a long time, even though she kinda groomed me, but, I mean, yeah, it was hard. They didn't take me seriously, and I think because I was in my own trauma state too to begin with, because I mean, being with a narcissist and I did deal with my own abuse from him, so I was emotional and like rightfully so. But I think they saw my emotion as like almost like a weakness. And I remember my attorney telling me like, "Don't cry, like you can't come off emotional," and I'm like, how am I supposed to not? And I really had to like learn to shut that down and master that and get to a place where I could be, stoic, and I feel like that's really an unfair thing to ask of anyone. And I think the family law court system as a whole, they need to have trauma training for the, judge that's involved, for any mediator that's involved, because there were obvious signs of coercive control. There's obvious signs of abuse. And they looked at me and just said, she's unhinged because she's emotional. And that wasn't fair.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot because that's kind of how they portray you. You come in and you're agitated, you're afraid, you're angry, you're crying, you want your voice to be heard, whereas they come in and they're cool, calm, collected, and just
Hmm.
act like, I got this, right?
Yeah.
And all they have to do is point, like, look, right? And the courts are like, oh, yeah, hmm,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
unhinged. And they make that bias pretty early on, and it's hard to unravel that.
Right. Well, and then on top of it, I had his wife who worked for the court
Yeah.
sitting behind me in the benches as like a passive aggressive taunt. And, she's friends with everyone at the court. So it was this extra layer of madness that was added to it.
Wow, that's incredible. So your son, he's doing better. How long since his last parenting time with his dad?
So his last parenting time was right after Father's Day. So it's been like I think we're going on like 9 months now with no
Mhm.
contact from dad. And, I still check in with him. I'm like, do you want to talk to your dad? And he's like, no, I don't. Um, so I just continued to support him with whatever he wants to do. I mean, realistically, it is up to him. Now it is a court order where he does get to decide where he wants to be. Um, so yeah, it's taken some time to really have him work through his own trauma, though. I mean, we had him in trauma therapy even before he stopped, completely talking to his dad, but since since then, his behavior has been like a 180. I mean, he went from, having a 504 in school to, needing all of these extra accommodations. He had like ADHD type symptoms to now his nervous system is regulated. So he is like a totally different kid. He's like getting straight A's in school. He doesn't have any behavioral issues. He's like thriving and it's pretty amazing to see. And I'm kind of like, it makes me upset at the same time though, because I'm like, this could have been his life way before this. Why did we have to get to this point where he had to stand up for himself over and over and say he didn't wanna go over there? It shouldn't have come to that.
Does his dad make any attempts to reach out to him?
No, and that's the thing with narcissists too is, once they lose control, that's kind of it for them. Like, he doesn't have any sort of control over his son anymore, and he's I don't think he'll ever reach back out.
During the court hearings, did the word parental alienation ever present itself from either side?
Oh, he tried to say I was alienating our son. Yeah, he tried to say I kidnapped our son a couple of times just because I, filed something where like when, there was abuse going on and I said I'm not letting my son go back until we have a court date. So he said I was kidnapping.
How do the courts react to that?
Well, I mean, I filed something, so they were like, "Well, she's not kidnapping," there was concern there, but then they're like, "These are all unfounded or, inconclusive reports." So they made me seem like I was just making inconclusive reports just because I was vindictive, and they weren't looking at the fact that, his wife was a district attorney, and that's why there weren't charges filed.
And how about the word parental alienation? When he tried to make you out to be the alienator, how did they react to that?
The court
Mhm.
I mean, they didn't really react to it. I think they just kind of like I mean, there wasn't really anything they can do because I was doing everything the right way. I was filing things.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it was kind of like they just labeled us high conflict and just called it a wrap.
I'm just always curious because a lot of times they'll punish parents for using that word, or they'll say it's not founded or there's not scientific backing behind that terminology. So I'm always
Yeah.
curious how they address that when it's presented by either party.
I mean, yeah, I think because I was doing things the right way, they were like, okay, you can say she's alienating or she's kidnapping, but, I wasn't. So,
Any thoughts you want to share with our listeners and parents, grandparents? Because it's not just moms and dads, it's siblings, it's grandparents, it's family
yeah,
members, right? It affects the whole family unit.
right.
Obviously, the child and the parent are the targets, but it's a systemic family problem. Any thoughts you want to share on that?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, just, being child focused, I think, that gets lost along the way. It's like really looking at what the child actually needs should be everyone's focus at the end of the day. I mean, we're shaping lives, we're shaping people, and, you know, I just think that that needs to be more of the primary concern, not, everyone's ego.
Or how are the lawyers getting paid? And
Yeah.
we need a guardian ad litem. And what about minors counsel? And although therapeutic intervention is critical, it's finding the right support system for these children as well, because in many cases, these courts have therapeutic intervention with untrained practitioners who actually
Right.
exacerbate the problem.
Right, right. I mean, and that was one thing where I'm kind of glad it didn't get to the point where we had minors counsel, because I'm like, would his voice even be heard then? Because we had an evaluation at one point, and and my son was like, I think he was like 4 or 5, but my son was still telling the evaluator things that were going on with his dad, was very open and honest about it. And the evaluator was like, well, I don't know. It's all fine, like, he's like, there, I don't see that there's anything wrong here. And I'm like, my son literally told you that his dad is hurting him and has hurt him, and you're not going to do anything. Like, and we forked out a lot of money for it. And I say we, really, it was me that forked out the money for it. I don't think that his dad ever ended up paying him. Um, so yeah.
Do they ever have you two do any psych evaluations?
No, and I asked for that. I'm like, "Please, can we do a psych eval?" And they wouldn't do it. They said if I wanted to go through and have, like, a full psych eval, it would have cost me $20,000. And at the time, I was making $12 an hour. And I'm like, "How am I supposed to do that? Do I need to win the lottery?" Like, it's just insane to me. It shouldn't cost someone money to protect their child from an abusive situation.
Any final thoughts?
There just needs to be reform. I mean, there really needs to be family court reform. Again, I am looking into legislation for mandated trauma training for judges and mediators and evaluators. And I haven't heard back yet, but I've been sending emails to like everyone, to like the judicial committee, to like anyone I can think of, to try to get something like this in motion, because there needs to be something in place. It's not just me. I mean, it's not just California, it's everywhere.
Have you partnered with any of the advocates that are working toward legal reform in individual states?
I have begun the process of that also. Yeah.
So, Robert Garza, have you heard of
Oh,
him?
I'm not familiar, no.
Yeah, I would say if you wanted to be part of any legislative reform, I wouldn't not do what you're doing, but I would partner with Robert Garza, who has had success in almost all 50 states, if not all 50, on legislative reform. So you can just go to
Awesome.
robertgarza.com or on Facebook, and he has a strong following, and he would be happy to connect and give you the tools you need. That's going to help create change. And I know there are some groups in California already working toward that.
Awesome. That is good to know. I'm gonna look him up. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I think you'll find a lot of success and you'll see that he's done a lot of the work already.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, what I will do for our listeners is definitely put your book in the show notes, and they can look for your book. And if you want, I can share your contact information if they want to reach out to you and discuss anything specifically. But I appreciate you being a guest and sharing your story on the Fractured Families podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fractured Families podcast. I hope our conversation has provided you with support, understanding, and actionable insights to help you navigate your own family challenges. Remember, healing is a journey, and reaching out for help is a sign of strength. You're not alone. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach more families in need. You can contact me on social media at Parental Alienation is Real and visit our website for additional resources and ways to get involved. Stay strong, stay connected, and keep fighting for the family bonds that matter most. Until next time, take care and stay resilient.